My mother-in-law jabbed a finger into my 200-pound waist and called me dead weight. The kind of woman who could barely haul herself into a field, let alone work one. I planted a hand on the bed to get up and argue. Bad idea, I forgot to rein in the ridiculous strength humming through this body crack. The solid wood bedpost splintered under my fingers, and with one careless kick I sent a 100-pound iron chest skidding across the room like an empty soda can. Every jaw in the family practically hit the floor. I gave them my most awkward, perfectly polite smile. Mother, remind me, who exactly did you just call dead weight? Hey everyone, it is Xiao Yua, 200-pound farm wife, tries to sit up in bed and argue with her mother-in-law. She forgets to control her strength. The bedpost splinters under her fingers, a 100-pound iron chest skids across the room like a kicked shoe. She looks at the frozen faces around her and smiles politely. Mother, remind me, who exactly did you just call dead weight? Let's go. Lin Yuxiao, how long are you planning to rot in that bed? The woman's sharp, raspy voice scraped across my ears like a broken comb. The rice jar is nearly empty. What are you waiting for? Grain to fall through the roof because you stayed in bed long enough. My eyes flew open. No fluorescent lights, no desk buried under reports. Above me were smoke, darkened rafters webbed with dust. The walls were yellow clay, cracked and flaking. I lay on a brick, hard-heated platform bed beneath a faded quilt, patched so many times it was more repair than fabric, for a full 30 seconds. My brain refused to boot. Then I tried to sit up. The instant I moved, an enormous weight dragged me backward thud. The bed frame groaned like I had nearly punched straight through it. I stared at my hands. They were not the narrow, bony hands I remembered from years of hammering at a keyboard. These were broad, rough, thick-fingered hands with soft dimples pressed into the backs by their own flesh. I yanked the blanket away. Under a coarse homespun dress sat a massive waist, heavy hips, and legs thick as pillars. This body was easily a full size larger than anything in my memory. 200 pounds minimum. Before I could process that, another person's memories burst into my head like a dam had broken. Lin Yuxiao, Willow River Village, Qinghe County, Great Chu, married into the Shen family 3 years ago. Her life had been rough from the start. She was born with a huge appetite, then married into a family so poor they could barely keep food in the house. Constant hunger and poor health had left her body unusually heavy. Behind her back, the villagers treated her like a joke and called her the Shen family's fat wife. After marrying Shen Tingzhou, the original Yuxiao had become painfully insecure. Her mother-in-law's endless sighing over money only made it worse. She shrank into herself, spoke as little as possible, and let every insult slide. 2 days ago she had gone into the hills for firewood. Her footing slipped. She hit her head and blacked out. When this body opened its eyes again, I was the one inside it. I leaned against the crumbling wall and said nothing for a long time. In my last life, I had survived boardrooms, hostile negotiations, impossible deadlines, and executives who smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. And now I had actually been dropped into the most ridiculous trope imaginable, a historical transmigration story. I looked down at my new body. Last time around, I had the degree, the resume, the salary, the polished office, all of it. The one thing I ran out of was time. This time, fate had dealt me a broke farm wife everyone in the village mocked. So what? I pressed a hand to my chest and felt the steady, powerful beat beneath my palm. I was breathing. That was capital enough. Give me the worst hand at the table. If I was still alive, I could play it. The patch door curtain snapped aside. A tall man stepped in carrying a chipped ceramic bowl. His rough work clothes were patched at the elbows and knees. He had deep-set eyes, a straight nose, and the kind of sharp, handsome face that would have turned heads if exhaustion had not carved itself so deeply between his brows. Shen Tingzhou, me husband, technically speaking. From the scraps of memory I had inherited, he was not affectionate, but he was not cruel either. His father had died early, and Tingzhou had been carrying the whole family ever since. He He supported his widowed mother, paid for his younger brother Shen Ziyan to study at the academy, worked until his hands cracked, and somehow never once mocked his wife's size or quiet nature. He simply endured silently, like a man who had forgotten he was allowed to put anything down. "Can you sit up?" He set the bitter, smelling medicine on a low table with one broken leg. His voice was low and slightly hoarse, almost flat. I looked at him. His eyes were bloodshot from too many nights without sleep, but there was no disgust in them, no contempt. "I can." Remembering what had happened the first time I moved, I took a breath and tried to be careful. I shifted my weight, planted both hands on the solid elm bed frame, and pushed crack. The sound of splitting wood snapped through the room. My hands dropped an inch. I looked down. 2 deep palm prints had been crushed into the old elm rail. At the same time, my elbow brushed a wooden chest beside the bed. It was packed with farm tools and scrap iron and had to weigh well over 100 pounds. It slid across the floor like an empty cardboard box. Boom! It hit the wall hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Tingzhou froze with one hand halfway toward the medicine bowl. I froze too. Slowly, I stared at my thick, clumsy-looking hands. Under the softness, power surged through this body like a hidden engine, not ordinary strength, not even close. The original Yuxiao had been carrying something extraordinary all along. 200 pounds of body and enough raw strength to move like a human battering ram. Tingzhou's gaze moved from the chest to the handprints in the bedrail. "Were you always this strong?" I did not even blink. Hit my head, memories fuzzy. Technically true, the original Yuxiao had spent her whole life hunched over, ashamed of being noticed. She avoided heavy work because any awkward movement drew laughter. She had never discovered what her body could actually do. Tingzhou studied me for another second, then let it go. He nudged the bowl toward me. "Drink. You're still recovering. Don't rush back to work." Before I could answer, a weary sigh came from outside. "Tingzhou, you're still using our last good herbs on her." His mother pushed through the curtain. Her graying hair was twisted up with a plain wooden pin, and years of wind, sun, and worry had written deep lines into her face. When she looked at me, there was no real malice there. Just a woman cornered by poverty. Eldest daughter. "In-law, don't hate me for speaking plainly," she said. "You're heavy. You work slowly, and you eat more than the rest of us. I know you can't help it, but we have barely any land. Ziyan still needs money for his studies. Tingzhou is killing himself trying to keep this house standing. We can't keep going like this." The old Lin Yuxiao would have lowered her head and cried without making a sound. I was not the old Lin Yuxiao, picked up the medicine and drank the whole bitter bowl without flinching. Then I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and met my mother-in-law's eyes. "I understand. From now on, I'll help cover the household expenses." She stared at me as if I had started speaking another language. "You? How?" "By making money." The room went quiet. A young scholar in a faded robe leaned around the doorway. Shen Ziyan, Tingzhou's younger brother, was already a grown man, clean-cut and bookish. "Sister-in-law, you're going to make money." I gave him the same smile I used to wear before walking into a negotiation everyone else thought we had already lost. There's only one way to find out whether I can. That evening, the 4 of us ate around a battered wooden table. Dinner was grim: coarse black flour cakes mixed with husk, bitter wild green soup without a drop of oil, and a tiny dish of sour pickles old enough to have a family history. I chewed without complaint while my mind ran numbers. The Shen family was broke. Fine. But this county was also a market with almost no product innovation. In my previous life, I had managed food and restaurant projects. I had studied street food hits, customer psychology, packaging, pricing, foot traffic, repeat purchase, and all the tiny tricks that turned a snack into a line around the block. Here, seasoning was limited, and most cooking methods were simple. I did not need magic. I needed a pan, heat, salt, fat, spice, and something people had never tasted before. At dawn the next morning, I walked straight into the kitchen. If I wanted out of this hole, I needed startup money. And when you had no money, the The first rule was simple: test small, lose small, learn fast. My mother-in-law hovered when she saw the knife in my hand. "You're really doing— We don't have food to waste." "Then I won't waste it." I smiled and turned my wrist. The rusty cleaver blurred over the cutting board, with that impossible strength stabilizing my arm. The extra weight of this body barely mattered. A good knife hand was not about flashy tricks. It was power under control. I stepped onto the stove ledge and took down half a piece of old cured pork the family had been saving since New Year. Selling all of it would have been gambling. If nobody bought my food, the family would spend the next 2 weeks eating air. I cut off 1/3. The pork became slices so thin light passed through them. I washed a few greens from the yard and a handful of wild chilies from the hills. Zien appeared in the doorway, holding a book. "Sister-in-law, the town market connects to the county seat. Rich people there have eaten every delicacy imaginable. Can this really sell?" I never looked up from the knife. Remember this: people don't always pay for expensive ingredients. They pay for something new, something that wakes them up. The people of this era were used to boiled food, stews, simple griddled cakes, gentle seasoning, hot oil, hard searing, garlic, smoke, and chilies. Their taste buds were about to get a surprise meeting with the future. Fire pan, heat. I scooped a generous spoonful of precious lard into the wok. My mother-in-law nearly stopped breathing. The fat hissed. I threw in the pork sizzle. The slices curled and browned, releasing a deep roasted aroma. Then I tossed in the dried chilies. Whoosh! The sharp, smoky heat exploded through the tiny kitchen. Outside, Tingzhou stopped chopping wood with his axe hanging in midair. Me mother-in-law swallowed so hard I heard it. She still managed to look heartbroken. Heavens, how much oil did you use? I lifted the heavy iron wok with one hand and tossed the food cleanly through the air. Mother, if we want people to hand us real money, we have to give them something worth paying for. A few minutes later, the first batch was done. Glossy strips of spicy cured pork, bright greens underneath, each bite crackling with salt, smoke, fat, and heat. I did not dump it into a basin. Instead, I packed small portions into short bamboo cups I had cut, scrubbed, and dried the night before. Green leaves lined the bottom red, and white slices of pork sat neatly on top. I tied each lid with dried grass cord. Zien frowned. "Wouldn't it be easier to carry one big tub and scoop out however much people buy?" "Food has to win the eye before it wins the mouth," I said. "Clean packaging makes a strange product feel safe. Make it look special, and people are more willing to try it." Tingzhou said nothing, but I could feel him watching me. The timid woman who used to stare at the floor was gone. In her place stood someone quick, decisive, and very obviously planning more than one breakfast stall. After we ate, I swung the basket of bamboo cups onto my back. Between my body and the food, the load should have been miserable. It felt like a school backpack. Tingzhou walked over, took the basket from me without asking, and slung it over his own shoulder. "I'm coming with you." I looked at his broad back and did not argue. The morning market was already roaring when we reached town. I did not shove into the biggest crowd. I stopped at the edge and studied the place the way I used to study a commercial district. Steamed bun stall, noodle cart, general goods, tofu, tea. Each had its own traffic pattern, its own regulars, its own little ecosystem. I stopped beside an older woman selling tofu. "Auntie, could I borrow half a stall's worth of space? I'm selling something new. If I get in your way, I'll move immediately." She looked me up and down, then sniffed toward my basket. "What's in there? Smells dangerous." Spicy wok seared pork house recipe. I opened one bamboo cup and offered her a tiny piece. She chewed twice, her eyes widened. "Well, I'll be," she nodded hard. "Stay right there." At first, nobody stopped for the shabby, oversized village woman at the edge of the market. That was fine. I lifted one lid halfway. The early autumn breeze did the advertising for me. Smoky pork, chili, hot fat, and salt rolled into the street and hooked passing noses one after another. A young scholar in blue robes followed the smell over fan in hand, trying and failing not to swallow. "Madam, what is that?" And how much? Spicy pork in bamboo, 3 copper coins. I had priced it carefully. Each portion cost a little over 1 coin to make. 3 coins was high enough for margin, low enough that an ordinary customer could buy it as a treat. The scholar hesitated. 3 coins could buy 2 meat buns. Then the smell hit him again. He paid. The first bite went into his mouth. He sucked in a breath. Heat bloomed across his face. Sweat pricked at his forehead. Then he grinned. That is incredible. Hot, smoky, salty. Now that is food. Perfect with rice. Even better with wine. 1 customer was all it took. Give me 1? I'll try it. 2 for me. My father will love this. Within an hour, all 20 cups were gone. People who came back for seconds found an empty basket and looked personally betrayed. I dusted my hands on my apron and weighed the purse in my palm. 60 copper coins. Ting-jo had stood quietly beside me the entire time, making sure no one caused trouble. Now he stared at the money with a look I had never seen on his face. 60. For a farm family, 60 copper coins could buy rough grain for days. I pushed the purse into his hands and raised an eyebrow. Guard the family fortune. We're buying grain. Then we're going home. His fingers tightened around the cloth purse. When he looked at me again, something had changed. The old helpless pity was gone. For the first time, he was looking at me as an equal. Yuxiao, he said quietly, you worked hard today. It was the first time since I woke in this world that he had said my name. For some reason, I noticed by the time we returned to Willow River Village. Word that the Shen family's daughter-in-law had made serious money in town had already spread faster than smoke. That night, I poured all 60 coins onto the chipped table. They clattered under the oil lamp. Me mother-in-law's eyes turned red. Her rough fingers trembled as she touched them. I've lived half my life and never seen anyone make this much in one day selling a little food. This is test money, I said. We're not saving it. We reinvest all of it in ingredients and seasoning. In the past, she would have protested until midnight. This time, she clenched her jaw and nodded. Fine, I trust you. For once, the family was smiling. Then the courtyard gate exploded inward bang. Half the rotten door slammed onto the ground. Shen Ting-jo, stop hiding, a man shouted. You owe my master money. Pay today, or your scholar brother can forget about ever setting foot in an exam hall. Ting-jo's face changed instantly. He was on his feet before I was. I followed him outside. A set man stood in the courtyard with 2 hired thugs behind him. Wang Meng steward to landlord Wang. The original Yu Xiao's memory supplied the rest. Last year, Shen Ting-jo's father had fallen gravely ill. The family borrowed 2 taels of silver for medicine. 2 taels meant 2,000 copper coins. To the Shen family, it might as well have been a mountain. The note says we still have 10 days, Ting-jo said. Stepping in front of Xian, his fists clenched at his sides. Why are you collecting now? 10 days, Wang Meng sneered. Your kitchen pot is probably thinner than paper. In 10 days you'll vanish. And then who am I supposed to collect from? He grabbed Ting-jo by the collar. Ting-jo's jaw locked. He clearly wanted to hit him. But landlord Wang had power in the county, and he knew exactly what retaliation could cost his family. His mother went white. Let go. My voice cut through the courtyard. Wang Meng glanced at me and laughed. Well, look at this. The Shen family's walking mountain wants to play hero for her husband. I did not answer. I walked straight toward him. Before either thug moved, my right hand closed around the wrist, gripping Ting-jo's collar. Me fingers locked like a steel vice. I said, I repeated. Colder now, let go. I squeezed. Wang Meng's face emptied of color. He yelped and released Ting-jo at once, stumbling backward until his knees hit the ground. What are you made of? He gasped, clutching his wrist. Let go! You're crushing me! I released him with a flick and accepted the rough cloth Ting-jo held out. Then I wiped my fingers one by one as if I had touched something sticky. The Shen family will repay every coin, I said. Give me 1 month, principal and interest. I'll bring it to the Wang estate myself. 1 month. Wang Meng stared at me like I had promised to buy the moon. Then anger rushed back into his face. Fine, 1 month. If you don't have 2,000 coins by then, your whole family will be working off that debt under my master's terms. He backed out of the courtyard with his men, trying very hard to look as though he had chosen to leave. The night wind moved through the yard. Nobody spoke. Tingzhou turned to me. You showed 2,000 coins. Even if you sold 60 coins worth of pork every single day and spent nothing, you still wouldn't make enough. Do you understand what you just promised? I do. I held his gaze. In my previous life, I had negotiated projects worth millions. 2,000 copper coins did not scare me. Retail won't get us there, I said. So we stopped thinking retail. Xian blinked. What does that mean? It means I don't want 20 customers. I looked up at the stars, my mind already mapping routes, margins, and volume. I want every breakfast stall and noodle cart in Qinghe County selling for me. Over the next few days, I changed the entire plan. Cured pork was delicious, but it was too expensive and too slow to scale. If I wanted volume, I needed ingredients people overlooked. So I took Tingzhou and Xian into the hills and came back with baskets of wild mushrooms, crisp radishes, greens, garlic, and wild peppers. To most people here, those were poverty foods, bitter greens, cheap roots, things you ate because you could not afford anything better. To a former food industry project manager, they were low-cost inventory begging for better processing. I blanched away the bitterness, pressed out moisture under heavy stones, mixed my own spice blend, then cured everything with salt, chili, garlic, and aged vinegar. When I opened the first jar, the sharp, bright aroma made everyone in the yard look over-tangy, spicy, crunchy, the kind of side dish that made plain rice disappear twice as fast. This time, I did not set up my own stall. I went straight to the tofu auntie, then to the busiest noodle and flatbread vendors in the market. Put these pickles on your counters for free, I told them. Recommend them with your noodles and cakes, sell one little dish for 1 copper coin, and you keep 30%. They stared at me. The idea was almost absurdly simple by modern standards consignment. No upfront cost, no inventory risk, free extra profit. To them it sounded like witchcraft. They were still hesitating when one noodle vendor picked up a strip of radish and tasted it. His eyes lit up. That ended the discussion. Within 2 weeks, Lin family pickles were everywhere in Qinghe Market. Every morning, I stood in the Shen courtyard using an iron paddle taller than some children to toss and mix hundreds of pounds of vegetables in huge vats. No ordinary kitchen worker could have managed the batches I could. Tingzhou pushed the cart into town, delivered stock, collected orders, and kept the vendors supplied. Xian handled the accounts and commission splits. My mother-in-law counted the growing stacks of copper coins so often I thought she might polish the faces off them. After half a month, our net profit reached 1.5 taels of silver. The debt was finally within reach. But business has teeth. The moment you start taking a bite out of someone else's market. Somebody notices zone morning. I pushed a heavy cart loaded with a new batch of braised food into town to test another product line. Several familiar vendors immediately started giving me nervous looks. I followed their eyes. At the end of the market stood Chen Jinbao, the spoiled young master of Prosperity House, the largest restaurant in the county. He was fanning himself while 6 or 7 broad-shouldered guards blocked my path. So, you're the village woman who's been stealing our cheap customer business. He tapped the side of my barrel with his fan and looked me over as if I were something stuck to his shoe. I straightened, at my size. Straightening was enough to make me a wall. Customers choose what they want to buy. I said, if Prosperity House is losing them, that sounds like a Prosperity House problem. His smile vanished. Seems nobody taught you how things work in Qinghe County. He pointed at my cart. On my family's turf, you don't sell a cabbage leaf without our blessing. Smash the cart. Dump the stock. His guards surged forward. People scattered with startled cries. Sister-in-law! Xian shouted from beside the account basket. I did not retreat. I stepped forward. My right hand shot out and caught the rim of the enormous iron stockpot on the cart. It was full of hot braising liquid, and easily weighed over 100 pounds, I lifted. One hand, the whole pot rose off the cart and hung in the air, steady as if it weighed nothing. Steam rolled over my forearm. Every guard stopped. "Want to wreck my stall?" I asked. Then I stamped once, crack a thick stone paving slab split beneath my foot, hairline fractures racing across it like a spider web. I held the heavy pot at shoulder height and looked down the line of men. "Then come closer." Nobody did. The guards stared at the broken stone, then at the iron pot in my hand, and began finding reasons to stand farther away. Chen Jinbao's fan slipped from his fingers. His face had gone pale. Whatever insult he had planned next apparently died before reaching his mouth. Then applause sounded from behind the crowd, slow, deliberate. "Well done," said a deep male voice. "Remarkable strength, better nerve." The crowd parted. A middle-aged man in dark patterned silk walked toward us. His clothes were understated but expensive. His eyes were sharp, and a fine jade ring turned slowly beneath his thumb. Chan Wanshan, the richest merchant in Qinghe County, and the man who actually owned Prosperity House. He looked at his sweating son and gave a disgusted snort. Then he turned to me. "Madam Lin, would you be willing to take tea with me at Prosperity House?" I lowered the iron pot back onto the cart as gently as setting down a teacup. Then I dusted off my hands. Why wouldn't I lead the way, Boss Chen? I knew what had just happened. The little game of scraping together two tails was nearly over. A much bigger table had finally opened a seat for me. Prosperity House's best private room was quiet enough to make the market outside feel a world away. A charcoal brazier warmed the room. Faint incense covered the smells from the main dining hall. I sat squarely in a wide hardwood chair, filling most of it, and faced Qinghe County's wealthiest merchant without lowering my eyes. Qian Wanshen poured premium tea himself. "Madam Lin, I prefer plain talk," he said. "Your pickles and side dishes are genuinely unusual. I'll pay 200 taels of silver for every recipe you have. 200 taels for an ordinary farming family. It was life-changing money land, a proper house, servants, security." I barely looked up. I lifted the tea lid and brushed aside a floating leaf. "Boss Chan, now I see how you got rich. 200 taels for a spring that keeps producing gold." His smile thinned. "You have a large appetite, Madam Lin. Strength aside, you are still one woman without family influence or official backing. Valuable things attract dangerous attention. I assume I don't need to explain that." There it was. Not quite a threat. Too polished for that. A reminder, if I refused to sell, the Qian family had more than one way to make business difficult for me. I set down my cup. "You misunderstood me. I didn't come here to sell recipes." The porcelain clicked against the table. "I came to offer you a partnership." Chan Wanshan actually laughed. "A partnership? Prosperity House earns money every day and employs the best cooks in the county. Why do you think you belong at the same negotiating table?" "Because your kitchen can't make what I make," I said, "and it definitely can't make it at my speed." I stood. "Take me to the kitchen." We arrived during the busiest prep period. Two butchers were sweating over half a hog nearby. Pastry cooks leaned their full weight into a batch of dense dough, red-faced from the effort. I walked to the butcher's station and moved one man aside just as he raised a heavy cleaver over a pork leg. Too slow. The entire kitchen turned to stare. I picked up the pork leg with one hand. With the other, I took the thick-backed kitchen knife from the block. Then my wrist moved slice turn. Cut pull. The blade followed the seams between bone and muscle with speed that made the cooks forget to breathe. I did not even need to put the leg down within moments. The bone slid free, nearly clean enough to polish. The meat fell into a basin in neat, even pieces. Then I moved to the pastry station. I tipped a huge mass of fermented dough onto the thick stone work table. Both hands came down. Thump, thump. The floor trembled with every fold and strike. What took an experienced cook most of an hour took me a fraction of the time. The rough lump became smooth, glossy, elastic dough that stretched without tearing. Silence swallowed the kitchen. Even Qian Wanshan's mouth had opened slightly. I wiped my hands on a dry cloth. Do you understand now? I nodded toward the stations. The recipes are in my head, but the production advantage is here. I held up my hands. You can copy a spice list. You can't copy the strength, the speed, or the control that comes with it. That was my real barrier to entry, not a secret sauce. In an era without industrial equipment, one woman with the output of a machine shop was practically a factory by herself. Chen Wanshan took a slow breath. The condescension disappeared from his face. What replaced it was far more useful, the sharp interest of a businessman who had finally recognized leverage. How do you want to structure it? Now we were negotiating as equals. I supply the core spice mixes and process the key semi-finished products. Prosperity House handles sales, packaging, delivery, and expansion. Profit on the new product line is split 30-70. 30 to me, 70 to you. His eyebrows rose. I continued. One condition, my workshop remains independent. Your people do not interfere with my production or my own sales channels. I did not demand half-modern management had taught me one thing very early. Owning more of a smaller pie was not always smarter. Chen Wanshan controlled distribution, transportation, prime storefronts, suppliers, and connections I did not have. If I wanted scale, I needed his network more than I needed to win an argument over 10 percentage points. He studied me for a long moment. Then he slapped the table. Bring paper and ink, we sign today. That afternoon, I rode back to Willow River Village in a Prosperity House carriage with 50 taels of silver as an advance payment. The carriage had barely stopped outside the Shen home when shouting erupted from the courtyard. 1 month is up, Wang Meng's voice. Shen Tingzhou, if you don't have 2,000 copper coins today, we're taking property until the debt is covered. I stepped down from the carriage. Wang Meng had returned with 4 men this time. They carried clubs and wore the confident expressions of people who thought numbers made them brave. Tingzhou stood between them and his family, gripping a wood-cutting blade low at his side. He looked like a man who had been pushed to the last inch of a cliff. There is still an hour before sunset, he said. The deadline has not passed. Cross into my house and start breaking things before then, and you'll answer for it. Wang Meng spat into the dirt. 1 hour. Give you a year and you still couldn't pull 2 taels out of this ruin move. Tree it. My voice rolled across the courtyard. Every one turned. I stepped down from the carriage and my landing sent a ring of dust across the packed earth. Wang Meng saw me and instinctively grabbed the wrist I had squeezed weeks earlier. Then he noticed the 4 men behind him and found a little courage. Don't bluff me. Lin, where's the money? I walked past him, reached into my clothes, and pulled out a silver ingot gleaming in the late sun. 10 taels. I raised it once so everyone could see. Then I brought it down onto the thick stone mill in the yard. Boom! Dust jumped. A shallow crater cracked across the hard stone surface, and the silver ingot lodged in the center, like a nail driven into rock nobody moved. That is 10 taels, I said. 2 clears the debt and interest. I looked at Wang Meng's men, who were suddenly very interested in standing behind one another. The other 8? I smiled without warmth. Call it a budget for anyone who still feels like turning this collection visit into a bad decision. Samoan swallowed loudly. Wang Meng stared at the fractured stone mill, whatever bravado he had left drained straight out of his face. Misunderstanding, he said quickly. Just a misunderstanding, Madame Lin. No need to get upset. He rushed forward, pried the silver out of the crack, then fumbled through his pouch for change. Here, 8 taels back, and the note paid in full, completely settled. He tossed the debt note down, gathered his men, and left so fast dignity never caught up. The courtyard stayed quiet for a heartbeat. Then my mother-in-law started crying. Not frightened tears this time. Relief Zian snatched up the debt note and tore it into pieces right there. I finally exhaled and turned to Tingzhou. His wood-cutting blade slipped from his hand and hit the ground. This was a man who had spent years carrying pain, debt, hunger, duty, and everyone else's future without asking for help. Now he was staring at me with something complicated in his eyes. Shock, respect, maybe even awe. Yuxiao. he walked toward me. No grand speech, no wounded male pride. He simply took my broad hands in his calloused ones and held them tightly. "From now on," he said, his voice rough but steady, "you make the decisions for this family." For the first time since waking in this world, my smile reached all the way to my eyes. 3 years later, nobody in Chingy County called me the Shen family's fat wife anymore. They called me Boss Lin. The name carried from market towns all across the Southern River region. With my abnormal strength and the business instincts I had brought from another lifetime, I built a massive food processing workshop outside the county seat. It started with pickles and braised foods. Then came seasoned meat floss, dried sausages, preserved snack foods, ready-to-cook products, and travel rations that could be prepared in minutes. By the time competitors understood what I was doing, my supply network had already spread across the region. Prosperity House opened branch after branch using products from my workshop, eventually expanding all the way to the imperial capital. Zian passed the provincial examination and became a respected scholar. Me mother-in-law traded patched cotton for fine silk, and somehow developed a new hobby, telling anyone who would listen that heaven had personally sent her a money, making daughter-in-law and Ting Zhou. He put away his rough farm clothes and became the chief manager of my trading company. He was calm, ruthless, with bad numbers impossible to bully, and better at running daily operations than most men born into merchant families. A few sour scholars occasionally mocked him for living off his wife. He never cared. If anything, he looked pleased. Late at night, when I was still checking ledgers, he would set a warm bowl of bird's nest soup beside me and knead the stiffness from my shoulders after a day spent inspecting workshops. "Boss," he murmured one evening, coming up behind me, "are today's accounts acceptable?" His arms settled around my large, powerful body. I closed the ledger. That month alone, the company had taken in 100,000 taels of silver. I laughed softly and reached back to pinch his handsome cheek. I never forced myself to become thin. This body was still broad, heavy, and extraordinarily strong. But when I walked through Qinghe County now, no one snickered. No one looked down on me. The same people who once treated my body as the punchline now stepped aside with respect, some with admiration, some with fear, more than a few with very polite smiles and business proposals. In a world built on power, beauty could make a woman desirable. It could also make her something other people wanted to possess. Strength was different, wealth was different. Enough of either could let you stop playing by someone else's rules. Enough of both could let you write new rules entirely. I laced my fingers through Tingzhou's and looked out at the rows of lanterns burning across my company grounds. In my first life, I collapsed at a desk before dawn, crushed under work that would have forgotten my name by Monday. In this life, I used these two hands to build a road nobody could close in front of me. A road that belonged to Lin Yuxiao. The story ends with lanterns burning across a company compound, a husband kneading the stiffness from her shoulders, and a woman whose body never changed, but whose world completely rearranged itself around her. It is satisfying, it is fun, and it almost hides the sharpest truth buried inside it. The revenge isn't the money. It isn't the silver ingot cracking a stone mill. It isn't even watching the people who once laughed at her step aside with polite smiles and business proposals. The revenge is that Lin Yuxiao never apologized for taking up Spacewatch, the structure. The original Yuxiao spent her entire life shrinking. Not physically, she couldn't. But emotionally, socially, psychologically, she made herself as small as possible. She hunched. She whispered. She avoided heavy work, not because she was weak, but because every time she moved, someone laughed. She had the strength to splinter wood with her bare hands, and she never once used it because the world had convinced her that her body was the problem. The new Yuxiao doesn't lose weight. She doesn't transform. She doesn't wake up thin and beautiful and suddenly earn the respect she was always owed. She wakes up exactly as she is and decides that the body everyone mocked is her greatest competitive advantage. That is the thesis. The thing they ridicule you for is often the thing they can't compete with. 200 pounds of body and supernatural strength in a world without machines. That is a factory. While every other cook needs 3 people and half a day to process a batch of meat, she does it alone in minutes. While competitors can copy her recipes, they can't copy her output. Her body isn't a liability, it is a barrier to entry. And the story is brutally honest about why no one saw it before. The original Yu Xiao had the same strength, the same body, the same potential. What she lacked wasn't ability, it was permission to use it. Every laugh, every nickname, every sideways glance taught her that her body was something to apologize for. So she hid the very thing that could have saved her family years earlier. That is not a fantasy problem. That is a real one. How many people are sitting on extraordinary capability right now, refusing to use it because someone convinced them it was ugly or wrong or too much? But here is what elevates this. Beyond a body positivity parable, Yu Xiao doesn't succeed because of strength alone. She succeeds because she pairs that strength with strategy. She doesn't just cook better food. She invents consignment retail. She doesn't just outmuscle the competition. She structures a partnership where she keeps production control while leveraging someone else's distribution network. She doesn't demand 50% of the profits. She takes 30 because she understands that owning a smaller piece of a much larger pie is smarter than winning an argument. Her body opens doors. Her brain decides which ones to walk through. And Shenting Zhou, the husband who never mocked her, never complained, never once treated her size as a flaw, becomes the quiet proof that respect doesn't require transformation. He didn't need her to change, he needed her to stop hiding. The moment she stood up and used what she had, he didn't flinch. He handed her the basket and said, "I am coming with you." That is not romance, that is recognition. One question for you. What is your 200 pounds? The thing about yourself, your body, your voice, your personality, your background, that you've been taught to treat as a weakness. The thing you've been hiding, minimizing, apologizing for. What would happen if you stopped shrinking and started using it? Tell me in the comments. I am Xiao Yu Mei. Every bedpost that needs breaking get broken. May every stone mill learn to fear your silver. And may you never ever let someone else's laughter convince you that the strongest thing about you is a flaw. See you in the next story.